Hello. I hope the other video on demonstrating how to analyze literature helped you to gain a better understanding of what literary analysis is and how it can be a very useful practice in many different applications in your life. This video is going to focus on how to use AI to help brainstorm, gain a better understanding of some information, but I'm also going to show you how it's not acceptable analysis. And what I mean by that is when I see some submissions for essays, they're not as in depth as what you could do on your own with analysis. So we're going to talk a little bit about how and when to use things like ChatGPT to enhance your brainstorming sessions, to reinforce some of your questions and information, and use it kind of as a launching pad in some instances versus an end-all. So right now, what I'm seeing, and full disclaimer, I really like AI. I really like ChatGPT, and using it for everyday life, especially with tasks that are helping me to be a little bit more, what's the word for it? To help get me out of maybe a stuck kind of mindset. If I constantly do the same sessions in a workshop or the same ideas in a workshop, I might put into ChatGPT, like, what are some other ways that I can get this point across? And to help me to brainstorm other ways. Or maybe I might ask it to, I might give it a question and ask it to do certain tasks, like put this into a spreadsheet. I'm not the best at spreadsheets. I don't use them all the time, but when I do have to use them, I need a little bit of a reminder. So it's good for mundane tasks, but it's not something that you want to turn in for a paper. So I over the years, I have seen an uptick in the use of AI, and I know there's all kinds of technology out there to try and combat it, or try and scrub your paper so it doesn't show up in this plagiarism detector or another, or AI detector or another. We know that there's no fail safe for that, and so here are a few tips on how to use it wisely, when to use it, how I would use it to maybe help me gain a better understanding of something. And use it as kind of a jumping off point, but still keep in mind that you want to question the information that it gives you, because it's not always accurate. I've had a couple of examples where it's given some information that is not accurate at all. I've played with it over the years to test little things, ask it questions about a book I'm reading. I know the answer to that book, to that question I'm asking, but AI doesn't. So sometimes it hallucinates and it makes something up that sounds plausible, but is absolutely not plausible. So you want to make sure that you're reading and taking your own notes before you dive into GPT. Or whatever resource you're using. Just like a calculator or just like any other tool, we want to make sure that we're using it in a way that is appropriate not only for its output, but for us too, what we need to use it for. So I'm taking my notes from the other day, and just FYI, there's another little a chance for, not say little, but there's another chance for extra credit, and another chance for you to demonstrate your process later in the video. So hang in there. You'll be able to get a chance to hear about that in just a few minutes. So I took my notes from the other session, and I remember, if you remember, I came up with an idea about an early message, a message that I understood from Poe's writing, from the works I looked at, and so I started asking questions. And so I knew I wanted to do a video on how and when you could use AI to kind of help you with your notes, help you with your brainstorming. And I also wanted to show how it can't exactly do analysis like we can as humans. It can't synthesize work like we can. So, but it can help me with a few things. It can reinforce some stuff. So I put in the prompt. I made a prompt for it, and I put it in for what I wanted to know. So my prompt, if you can see on the screen here, I said, can you help me provide more information about Edgar Allan Poe's writing, especially his poetry and meaning? So then I further prompted it, and I said, I would like you to look at the poems Sonnet to Science, To Helen, The City and the Sea, and Alone, to compare his writing to the historical time and culture. So these are all things that I took from my notes. These are things that I had questions about. These are things that I started to make some inferences with and about. And so I wanted to see what GPT could come up with. I've read all the poems. I've taken notes on them. Now I want to see an in-depth look at, and by no means these aren't all my notes, those are just a sample. I wanted to see what it could tell me in relation to what I'm finding. So I put in the prompt, and I'm going to show you my other screen too, where I'm prompting it, and this is what I came up with. So if you can see, I'm scrolling through the information, and I'm going to dive deeper into each of these parts. So already I'm seeing that it's breaking it up into subheadings. Now, that's typically a red flag for me if I see a submission, just FYI, if I see a submission that's not MLA formatted. MLA doesn't use headings or subheadings, except in rare cases. For a paper like this, if I'm seeing subheadings like that, I'm seeing information that is broken up, that's telling me, one, it's not synthesizing. It's giving me exact information for chunking and it's chunking up the different information. It's not analyzing, and it's not synthesizing. Remember, synthesizing is taking multiple works and bringing it to one particular idea to show how all of those works are working together to give you that idea. GPT can't do that yet. It's still separating it. And I say yet because it's changing every day. But the very minimum, it's going to give me basic information. It's not going to be able to analyze. Even though it's mentioning things like poetic elements or literary elements, it's not telling me the how, and it's not telling me the why. That's analysis. That's the difference. It's giving me basic information. So let me show you a little bit of what that looks like. And so I put it over into my Word document so I can make it a little bit bigger for you. So I just copied and pasted it right into my Word document, and you can see that it brought over some of those same elements. All right, so with my prompt, it says, this is what the feedback it gave me. It says, here's a closer look at each poem and how it resonates with the era's historical and cultural backdrop. So for Sonnet to Science, here's what it had to say. Told me when it was written, 1829. So I want to check that with the book because the book said it was published in 1831 and 1845, but it didn't necessarily tell me when it was written. So GPT might be correct on this. It might not. I might have to look up another source. Sonnet to Science reflects Poe's critical view of scientific progress, which he believed interfered with the imaginative spirit essential to poetry and the arts. Now it's taking a big leap there. That's a big leap because we don't know exactly what he was trying to do with this, if this is correct. But one thing it kind of reinforces for us is the idea that we questioned why science? Why Sonnet to Science? How does this relate to what was happening during the time period, what other authors were saying, what he was saying in his works too? Now, the reach here where it says he believed it interfered with the imaginative spirit essential to poetry. Now, I say it's a reach because we don't know for sure. Again, we don't have Edgar sitting with us. That would be kind of cool and weird, but we don't know unequivocally. But what we can say is that this is the message and this is how we got to that message. So I'm already questioning GPT, saying, how did you come up with that? So it says, during this period, the Industrial Revolution was transforming society and prompting debates about science versus humanities. Okay, so I can look up historical references. I can look up historical information. If you're not familiar with something like the Industrial Revolution, this is exactly where you would want to go find other sources on that. What does the textbook say about the Industrial Revolution? Does it match up with what GPT is saying? If not, you might want to question this a little bit more. And I always tell students, when you're using GPT to brainstorm or look at information, take it with a grain of salt, which means it might not be accurate. So you want to look at other sources. You want to compare it to what the textbook says, to what other sources say, other peer-reviewed information, history books. What do history books say about this? So if you're not familiar with the Industrial Revolution, that's something that I could use this as a brainstorming thing. I could say, oh, okay, so it's mentioning the Industrial Revolution. I didn't mention that in my notes, and I didn't even think about that, but that might be another point where I could look into. This is not the end all, but it's something I could use as a jumping off point, if that makes sense. It also says there's a contrast between science thinking and the humanities. What were people saying then? And how could I find that in his writing? How do I know there's a contrast there? It says the poem's tone is somewhat resentful. As Poe laments science's vulture, and it says vulture in quotes, effect on the mind, stripping it of mythology, fantasy, and ancient traditions. So we questioned that in our notes. Why Greek mythology? What is he doing with this? And GPT is saying, oh, there's a resentful tone here. But GPT is only giving us one word, and one word does taken out of context does not necessarily mean that that's a tone that relates to resentment. So I would want to look back at that line. I would want to look back at the actual poem and see if I could find lines that gave me a tone, lines that gave me an idea, and maybe I wouldn't use the word resentful. I might question that too. But it's giving me some ideas to go back into the poem. Again, this is not an end all. So if I were to see this as a submission in a paper, I would immediately question the how and the why. How did you come up with this idea? Why did you come up with this idea? What parts of the poem gave you this idea? So again, going back to the idea of your process. How did you come up with this? And remember, with literary analysis, you're trying to get this point across. So you want that proof. And that proof comes from that poem and the author's writing. How and why did you come up with this? If you're simply using what GPT says, you don't have the how and the why. So if you see in some of my notes and comments in your discussion posts or in your writing, tell me how you came to this idea. What part of the poem gave you that idea? And which particular lines did you interpret and gain this inference from? So it's also talking about emphasizing the importance of emotional experience and imagination. Did we see that in his poetry, or is that something GPT's just kind of putting together for us? Again, it's not giving us the how and the why, but it's sure giving us some ideas to look back at the poem ourselves, right? So do you see how it could be useful on one hand for brainstorming and giving us ideas and jumping off points? That's what I like to say. GPT gives me jumping off points to go and do more analysis and in-depth research. I'm coming up with the proof, right, from what I see in the poem. GPT is not going to do that for me. But it sure looks convincing at first glance, right? It's talking about tone. It's even giving a quote in there. But the problem is it's not quoting the entire line. It's quoting one word, and it could be taken out of context. It's also not using MLA formatting when it's quoting. So that's another thing. Even if you prompt it to use that, GPT is not going to know how to do that. And oftentimes it will make up citations. And so we want to be careful with that, because as a reader, I want to learn how you came up with this idea so I can compare it to my ideas. And I want to look up those parts of the poem. So you need to tell me which lines, which page number, and which poem it came from. And I also want to see what sources you used. So if you're telling me you used an outside source, one, I'm going to question that, because I've only asked you to use the textbook and the literature itself. And two, some of those sources, when I try and find them for myself, don't exist. That's a problem, right? If you're citing something that doesn't exist, which is oftentimes what GPT does, it's trying to do something that is outside of its realm. So sometimes it hallucinates and it makes it up. So we have to be careful of that. And again, this is not the end all. This is a jumping off point. It does the same thing with To Helen, the poem, and The City in the Sea. So we're seeing some very basic information that we could use as a jumping off point for our ideas and our research, but it's not giving us the how and the why. So for example, To Helen poem, it says 1831 is often seen as one of Poe's most beautiful tributes to female beauty and intellectual admiration. All right, that's another leap. Where did it get that from? We're not for certain, but I don't know that I would make that same leap based on the reading of it. And again, I'd have to go back to my notes and say, okay, did I see this? Was I seeing something else in this? I'm going to trust my instincts more than I would GPT, because sometimes, again, it's going to give you information that it thinks you want. It says the poem's idealization of Helen, inspired by the classical Greek beauty Helen of Troy, echoes the Romantic era's fascination with ancient Greece and Rome, as well as a reverence for beauty as a pathway to transcendence. Helen symbolizes a muse-like figure reminiscent of the Romantic poet's admiration for femininity, purity, and inspiration. So again, it's taking us down a different path. Why? Because it's looking at each poem on its own. So it's strayed away from my original question, because now it's going into its own little side note. So if you're noticing something, you might start to notice a pattern. Each part is a separate idea, because GPT can't do that synthesis that you could. Remember I talked about a common thread between all of the different poems that I was seeing that gave me a message, an overall message about the the poet and his work? GPT is not giving me that. So again, it's giving me some basic things to look at. So remember, we were questioning the Greek mythology references. I might need to go back and look at some Greek mythology reference information and to dig into it a little bit more to see if I can glean some information from it. It might give me a connection, it might not. And that's the beauty of doing your analysis notes, your work, to see what connections you are making. Again, it brings up his reverent tone and his depiction of the divine figure. But it's not telling us how they got to that conclusion of a reverent tone. And it's not telling us where. It's not giving us more the information that we're hoping for. But it's giving us a jumping off point that might give us more questions that we could look into and ask and help us to do a better analysis. It does something similar with The City in the Sea and the poem Alone. So hopefully you're starting to get the idea that it's taking these in chunks. It's chunking the information. It's not synthesizing like I know you can do, right? I know you can look at these different works throughout the time period to come up with an idea and a picture. Think of it as telling a story. What are all these works telling us about the people, the culture, the time period? And what ideas are you coming up with on your own? At the bottom, it separated out the historical and cultural reference parts. It didn't integrate it into each of the poems. It didn't integrate it into the overall message. So again, it's trying to help me. It's trying to answer that question as best as it can. But the only way it knows how to do it is to chunk it up. I, for my analysis, want to put that together so I have that common thread throughout. I hope that makes sense. Let's see what it has to say about the historical and cultural references. It says, Poe's poetry reflects the complexities of his personal life and cultural climate of the Romantic period, a movement that emphasized emotion, nature, and the sublime. Again, it's giving me another completely different idea. So each of these could be a jumping off point for me, but it's not putting them together. Right? It's not telling me how all 4 poems demonstrate something with historical references and cultural references. It's not putting those ideas together. It's giving us separate dictionary definitions and basic summary information, but it's not putting it together for me, which is something I want you to demonstrate. I want you to show how you took notes, what your process was. And if you would like to get some extra credit or if you'd like to rework a paper, show me your process. Make a video, upload it to YouTube, post it. There'll be a special part to post those video links. Show me and tell me your process. What did you do to use your notes, the book? What questions did you have? What observations did you have? And if you'd like to do a separate video after you've done your note video, just like I did, and you went in and prompted maybe ChatGPT, show me the results and what you think of it. Like, go through and kind of pick it apart just like I did. You know, what jumping off points can you take from this and in your process? Which parts are you questioning? Are you noticing something similar, that it's not explaining the how, the why, it's not giving references to different lines or passages or quotes like you could as a human? So there's your little surprise task that could not only get you a better understanding of how to work the process, but it gives me an understanding as the instructor of how I can help you more. If I'm seeing your process of how you're using GPT as a jumping off point or not, I mean, you might not use AI at all, but this is just kind of a little extra note to say you can use AI appropriately. You can, and here's how. But don't use it as a replacement for your thoughts and your work, because you can do amazing things that system cannot do. So keep that in mind. The human brain is amazing. And so we need to utilize those strengths that we have. If you have questions about the information I'm showing you, or you'd like to talk more about it, or maybe you want to learn more of how to use AI as a jumping off point, when to use it as a question, jumping off point, or information, or how do you go beyond AI? Now that you've seen what it's given you, how do you go beyond that? What's the next step? I'm happy to talk with you about that. Again, I'm a fan of AI and using it to help make things a little bit, easier to navigate, making it so that we can brainstorm different ideas together, or maybe it takes a menial task out of something for us. Regardless, we don't want it to replace our thoughts. We want it to be able to give us some different ways to think about something and questions. And if you're curious, here's what it said about culture and history. It's saying that Poe's work is often described as dark romanticism, a subset of romanticism that focuses on the macabre and the irrational aspects of human nature. That's another jumping off point. If you didn't notice this as dark writing, dark romanticism, or you didn't hear about that yet, that's something you could look up. You could say, I want to look up more about dark romanticism, and is this what Poe is fitting into or not? This is a great way to jump off and do your research. It also says it captures both the cultural anxieties of the time, such as the tension between scientific progress and imagination, and his own existential fears, ultimately creating a body of work that is both reflective of the 19th century and deeply personal. Again, that's highly opinionated, and that's quite a leap for ChatGPT. Do you agree with that? In your reflections, in your notes, you can put in there, I kind of agree, and this is why. This is where I'm seeing that. Or I don't exactly agree with that, but I would say this because I noticed this in his writing. Always back up your information with proof from the work itself. Don't rely on secondary sources for this type of analysis. I want to see your process. I want to see what you can do with analysis, what you're questioning, what you're looking at, what you're finding. There's so much that you can dig into, and AI is a jumping off point. It's a starting point, but by no means can it replace your great thoughts. So just a little bit about AI, how to use it appropriately, what I see when I see AI's generated information, what I question, and how I notice that it's, one, not analyzing, it's chunking, and two, it's not synthesizing. It's not a common thread among the different pieces in the time period. So I hope this helps you a little bit. I hope this helps you to better understand not only how to analyze and use information, but my process. You might have a different process, and that's okay. Send me a video link. Create a video showing your process, your questions, your frustrations, what you are wondering, and let's start that conversation to see how and when it might be appropriate to use AI. Show me how you're using it. You might have some more ideas that you use as jumping off points than I showed. I'm excited to discuss this more with you. I'm excited to see your work and your thoughts and your ideas. As always, please make sure that you are engaging in the discussion forums to ask questions and talk about these ideas. And you can even put in there, this is what GPT said, and this is why I disagreed or agreed with it. This is what I found when I researched. You can utilize this information. You can send me an email. We can meet over Zoom or Teams if that's something that you want to discuss more. If you are not using AI and you want to use it as a jumping off point, I'm happy to show you how to do that. There are free versions out there that you can utilize to make your life a little bit easier in some aspects, but by no means is it a replacement for your great thoughts. You can do great things. You can improve your reading, your writing, your critical thinking, and this is just one way to do that. Happy writing, and I look forward to seeing you in the discussion board.